Moving on to refrigerant issues, and I think I'll direct my first question to Greg. Now, what can the quota drive in terms of refrigerant change, and what further action do you think is needed?
I've got some experience with this from the New Zealand market, and they're probably a little bit more advanced than Australia at the moment. However, it will drive mix change in the type of refrigerants we're bringing in. Obviously, someone with a commercial interest in quota will want to maximise that quota. And to give you a perfect example, if I become challenged, and this will happen in the coming years, to bring in, say, R404, which has a GWP approximately of 4,000, I can bring in alternate gases such as 448, 452, that have either half to a third of the GWP impact of that gas. So I can bring in 3 kilos of one for every 1 kilo of 404. So it will definitely drive mix. That's going to start to influence the type of equipment that's being installed, the decisions that people are going to make. At the moment, there is a cost differential between these lower GWP gases because they're in lower production. So the high production, high GWP gases do have a price advantage, but that will change as quota starts to bite. And we want to make sure, as importers, that we're able to service the available market. You know, we don't want to be out of a particular product, but we're certainly going to be having conversations with clients around the type of equipment choices they're making, and we're also talking to things like charge minimisation. That's starting to affect behaviours now, and also looking at exploring alternate technologies, things like glycol using chilled water for a large-scale refrigeration plant. So quota's definitely going to have an impact. Okay. In terms of driving change, I really think we have to have a long, hard think about the recycling of some of the more onerous gases like high ozone depleting substances like 22. 404 is definitely, I think, that we shouldn't be looking to recycle large quantities. We should be looking more at that to service potential legacy equipment. I think, and this is going to be controversial, the Europeans have gone down the path of equipment bans for both new installation and servicing where they have prescribed GWP limits. It has created some bad behaviours, and I think everyone around the table, you know, we're sort of plugged into industry enough to know that people, when challenged to do, when they've got a piece of regulation or government legislation which is going to prevent them from doing their job, they try to find ways around it. My view is sensible and pragmatic equipment bans can work, but they need a level of regulation and they need enforcement. But the other thing you need to think about, and I think one of the biggest things that's going to become prevalent as we go forward, alternate refrigerants, you'll start to see people using more things like hydrocarbon, CO2 and ammonia. You do realise that none of those refrigerants are regulated. Anyone can get their hands on them, anyone can work with them, and the quality of workmanship, level of understanding, compliance with regulations and safety standards is going to be highly variable, and I think as that happens, we potentially could see some incidents happen with industry, and we have seen these things already. That's only going to grow in magnitude unless something's done about it. So quota's a good thing, but we have to be aware of some of the pitfalls down the track.
I was only going to add, as far as the quota goes, it's important to note that quota only covers bulk gas. So there's no quota on equipment. So if we want the demand for the bulk gas to change and the species we want changed, it'd be really good to have a look at what regulations or what complementary measures can be taken to control the equipment coming in to reduce future demand for the high GWP products. So I think that's really important. You know, we look at what government and industry and how government and industry can work together to really improve. The quota's a good thing and it will drive change, but the question is that drive happening quick enough? And we need to look at other things that we can do to drive that change quicker.
What things do you?
What I'd personally like to see is, what other targets, and what we can work with government to do, given that, if there's an appetite, to tighten up really like low-hanging fruit, things that are going to change anyway, and just tidy up the tail end. Really good example of that is we look at the split system sector, which is largely moved to R32 now. Yet where there's still 410A equipment coming in, again, it's less efficient, and the GWP, is, 2/3? Yeah, 2/3 more. So we could possibly look at having complementary measures and controls on equipment coming into the country to reduce the future demand of some of these legacy refrigerants and make the quota more effective.
We're seeing now through the GEMS database that it's about 90% of equipment now that has moved to R32 in that war-hung split space. But I think one thing that's critical for industry is having a global approach. We're seeing most manufacturers in Australia and New Zealand are multinational corporations, where Australia and New Zealand is only part of their business. So to drive effective change in terms of refrigerant use and any technological changes to products, having a global approach with markets such as Europe and trying to align the two is definitely going to increase speed to market, but then also support the supporting factors that go into changing refrigerants in products.
It's really encouraging to see what the air conditioning industry can do, the equipment manufacturers, in terms of driving change in technology and quota. There's a significant challenge that probably goes unseen in industry, and that is bespoke equipment. When you look at the refrigeration industry, where they're matching up evaporators and building large-scale cool rooms from scratch, nothing's pre-charged. A lot of this equipment is multi-refrigerant, so it's the contractor's or the consumer's choice as to which refrigerant they choose to go at their site. And the challenge, I think I said earlier, was going to be, how do you police this if you bring in those equipment bans? I think it really has to be flipped and put on the consumer. They have to be educated, or the people who are owning plant have to bear some of the responsibility for this to drive and demand change through the industry.
Kylie and I were recently at the Montreal Protocol meeting, which was in Montreal, and one of the things that was, I think, particularly interesting there was basically a panelist was asked very much the question that you just asked. But the answer was intriguing, and it was very much from a European perspective. And the question had to do with, well, what do we do about getting rid of the refrigerant that we already have in the bank? Is high GWP and all that. But then associated with that was, well, can't we cut the quota even further? And interestingly, the response was, well, if you cut the quota further, I absolutely have to use all of the refrigerant in the bank that's currently installed for as long as I can, because I don't have enough alternative product coming in. So when we think about 404, for example, if you can't get various alternatives, if you can't get other, because bear in mind refrigerants can be then broken up and used in different ways, what's the commercial response? The commercial response is to hold on to that high GWP refrigerant that they already have, that they don't need quota for as long as they can, which actually leads to a poor environmental outcome. So just reflecting on your question, Sandra, absolutely, Australia should do everything it can to drive change as quickly as possible, but bear in mind that guardrail there, right, as quickly as possible, is a real one, because if you push too hard, you get a poor outcome. And it's really important that government, as it thinks about how much it wants to turn the dial, realizes that not only do you cause commercial disruption, and that's something they should also avoid, but you also may lead to worse environmental outcomes. And that's something I don't think is clearly enough understood.
And I think Europe's moving way too fast, and the industry can't keep up. And I see that from a supply chain side with trying to get refrigerants for the new lower GWP generation of equipment coming through, spare parts, compressors. It's challenging. So if we do it, it should be based on our current situation in Australia, our supply chain, and it needs to be pragmatic and staged. It's more about transition rather than cutting everything off now. So the last part is, and I believe HFOs are going to have a large part to play, especially in the sub 50 kilowatt commercial refrigeration sector. Certainly the chilled water sector, it's going to have a large part to play. The issue around HFO currently is again, Europe's got such high demand, and I think, Greg, please correct me if you think I'm wrong, but in terms of transitioning, the priority seems to be Europe's going hard. They're going hard and they're going fast. New Zealand's going pretty hard and going pretty fast as well. We're there. We have an appetite to do it, and certainly we're starting to make all those noises and move down that path. And then you've got America, who, in my view, is lagging behind Australia and New Zealand. Asia's further behind again. So we're sitting behind the Europe in the terms of sitting in the queue waiting for equipment. So you've got this massive market with a huge population, and there's little old Australia and New Zealand. So we have to be very careful that we don't move too quick and find ourselves isolated I've committed to this equipment on this gas with that compressor, but I can't get it.
Yeah.
And it's happened. It's happening. So we need to be a bit careful there, and like I said, pragmatism is the order of the day. Move, but move pragmatically. There are some significant challenges that you have to consider about this, and hopefully that's given people a bit of insight.
One of the things that makes European policy about F-gas different, as Greg alluded to, is the size of the market. But bear in mind what the size of the market means. The size of the market means that if Europe sets and tries to set a new limit, companies will try to meet it. Fujitsu will try to meet it because it's a big market share for global production. One of my challenges, for example, particularly with proposed New Zealand policy, is that in some ways New Zealand thinks it can do what Europe does. And I admire the ambition. The problem is that Australia is 0.5% of the global market, and New Zealand's about 0.1% of the global market. So firstly, no one's building anything for New Zealand. If New Zealand wants to come up with a standard that's nifty and great and no one can meet, the companies like Fujitsu, companies that you represent, are simply going to say, go with God. We can't help meet that. And even when the product is available in Europe, trying to divert some of that to New Zealand or Australia and New Zealand is a real challenge. So it not only does you have to be really careful with how you set your ambition here. I absolutely think Australia and New Zealand both should be early adopters, fast followers, whatever jargon you want to use for that. But we can't be on the cutting edge. We need to recognize that we are not well set up to be on the cutting edge. What we do have to ensure is that when there is equipment that starts to become available in Europe and other parts of the world for whatever reason, but probably regulatory driven, that we can start sucking some of it here in a reasonably short time frame.